What's up, college football fans? Welcome to another edition of CFBMV. I'm TJ Cofield. I'll be joined in a few minutes by Chris Cox, as always. Let's go ahead and jump into Contender and Pretender.
Contender and Pretender.
Our contender this week is Mr. Johnny Manziel, a.k.a. Johnny Football from Texas A&M, quarterback. A lot of people were wondering how Texas A&M and Missouri would handle the transition to the SEC. I had my doubts about Texas A&M. I felt a little more confident about Missouri. I was wrong. Missouri has struggled. Texas A&M, it's fit in just like a glove. And a big reason is Mr. Johnny Football. He's pushing about 2,000 yards passing. He's thrown 14 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. It's a fantastic year for a young player transitioning into the toughest defensive league in the country. Look for big things from Mr. Manziel as time goes on. Our pretender this week, West Virginia. You know, I answered Kevin's question last week, and I had nothing but praise for Geno Smith. But Geno Smith had a terrible day in Lubbock against the Texas Tech Raiders. The Raiders just absolutely obliterating the Mountaineers. It wasn't just that the defense for West Virginia let them down. We already knew that that was a big question mark. It was the fact that Geno Smith looked absolutely lost. He was rushed out of the pocket. He was throwing inaccurately. He threw picks. This was a Geno Smith we had never seen before, and Dana Holgorsen and the West Virginia Mountaineers have a lot of work to do if they want to do big things this season.
Games to watch.
All right, next we come to games to watch this week, and recently my contender picks have been a bit of a kiss of death for the people I've chosen, for the teams I've chosen. We'll see if Johnny Manziel can survive that test this week as the number 6 LSU Tigers come to College Station to take on Texas A&M, the 12th man. Now listen, LSU proved to us last week that the loss to Florida doesn't mean that they are just a pretender. They're a tough team, they know how to run the ball, and they play defense on a level that maybe only Alabama can match this year. They're going to run into a tough place to play in the 12th man in College Station. Texas A&M has a great offense. They're starting to show they have a little bit of defense to complement that offense. Unfortunately, I think LSU just has enough for them on the defensive side to keep them slowed down. And I think the run game will be able to get going against the Aggies, and I think LSU will grind this one out. Now, number 17, West Virginia, paying a visit to number 4, Kansas State. We've already learned some of the weaknesses that do exist in West Virginia's game. We already knew about the defense as a question mark, but now we're also questioning Geno Smith, who last week I was praising as my Heisman frontrunner. Number 4, Kansas State has a bit of a dark horse for Heisman, and Colin Klein. Colin Klein is a workman's quarterback. He doesn't make mistakes, he rumbles with the football, and he manages the game well. I know that's a cliche. I like Kansas State in this one. I like them at home, and I like them pushing on to win the Big 12 in this one.
Ask TJ.
TJ, we didn't have anyone to ask a question for you this week, but there is something I wanted to know. We've hit the midseason point. What are your predictions as far as the teams that will be in the major BCS Bowls at the end of the season?
Question this week deals with projections for the BCS Bowls. Not predicting winners, just predicting who will be playing in them. And I gotta say, I'm looking forward to the day when we won't have to answer this question anymore. We can just look forward to that Final Four and maybe even one day an Elite 8 of football playoffs. But until then, this is what we got to deal with, so I have to make these predictions. Okay, let's start with the BCS Championship. I believe it'll be number 1 Alabama versus number 2 Oregon. You're not going to see 2 SEC teams in this game after last year. Alabama right now is clearly the favorite to be the number 1 team in the BCS rankings at the end of the year. I think Oregon will clearly finish number 2. And we'll get that great matchup of the high-powered offense versus just old man football in the SEC, and who's going to come out on top. Well, it'd be interesting to find out. Let's go next to the Fiesta Bowl. I have Kansas State versus LSU in this one. I think Kansas State will go on to win the Big 12 and represent the Big 12 in this game. I think LSU will be picked as an at-large team to star in this one, and should be a good matchup. Sugar Bowl, SEC team versus at-large. I believe this one will be Florida versus Louisville. Florida, I have winning the SEC East right now, and Louisville I have winning the Big East. I think Florida will get another Big East matchup in a BCS Bowl. The Rose Bowl, Big 10 versus Pac-12. I think this one will be Wisconsin, not based on merit, just based on the fact that the best teams in the Big 10 right now are not eligible to play in the postseason. And so I think Wisconsin will win it de facto, and I think USC will go on to represent the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl. The Orange Bowl. Now this one should be interesting. We have the ACC champion versus at-large. I believe the ACC champion will be the Florida State Seminoles. Now I believe your at-large team in this one, and NBC is going to get their wish. I believe it'll be the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in a matchup that will evoke memories of the 1980s and the classic Bobby Bowden versus Lou Holtz matchups.
Hometown Heroes.
Now on to Hometown Heroes, and once again the South Carolina Gamecocks will claim both a Hometown Hero matchup and a Games to Watch matchup. For the second week out of 3, the Gamecocks will be featured in a college game day match against the number 3 Florida Gators in the Swamp. Now listen, South Carolina got beat up against LSU last week. LSU came up, their offensive line really overperformed for their level of talent. They were able to push South Carolina back on the run. They were able to hold South Carolina close to neutral on offense. South Carolina's beat up, and they're facing another team that likes to beat up teams in the Florida Gators. They play physical football, they run the ball, and they play good defense. If South Carolina had the personnel available to them, I would probably pick them. But the injury bug has hit South Carolina in the form of not only influenza, but also just bangs and bruises here and there. And with South Carolina's lack of depth going into this game, I have to pick the Gators to continue their quest to be the Florida Gators of old, and I pick Florida winning in a low-scoring game here in the Swamp. Now, on to Death Valley for the Clemson Tigers. Number 14 Clemson Tigers taking on Virginia Tech. Last year, Clemson owned Virginia Tech, beating them twice, once in the regular season and once in the ACC championship. Virginia Tech is coming off what they call a historical comeback win against Duke. Now listen, Virginia Tech has some defense, and they have a bit of offense. They're going to give Clemson a harder time than Clemson should have at home against Virginia Tech. But Clemson's going to win this game, even though it might get sloppy at times.
This week, the Fighting Football Paladins are taking on FCS number 3, Georgia Southern, in a homecoming matchup at Paladin Stadium. Furman is not coming off of a good week for those hoping that they might upset the Eagles this week. After playing Wofford, who's number 5, 2 weeks ago, really tough, they came out and just played flat. And from people who've been to the game, really one of the poorer games that they've played recently in a 31-10 loss to Chattanooga, again, at home. And so Furman's going to have their hands full this week against Georgia Southern. Now, if there's any reason to hope, it's only by history, which can be a very fickle thing. Last year, Furman came off of a disappointing close loss and an embarrassing blowout loss, upset top 10 Wofford team on homecoming, so there is that. But Furman's going to have to get their act together. If they don't, it's going to be an ugly game. If they play well, if they play with the intensity and focus that they played against Wofford, maybe the home crowd can pull them into doing something special, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm not super optimistic, but I would love to be proved wrong. Well, that'll do it for this week of the Amalgamblog College Football Report. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend.